Everyone, my name is Rick Nielsen. I am the creator of Nielsen Global Training and rpnmediagroup.com. And today on my show, I am so honored to have this guest. He is probably one of the most influential and important people that has helped my career over the last 25 years. And I'm going to go ahead and rattle off his list of awesome accomplishments here so you guys have an idea how much of an impact this gentleman has had on our industry. He is a sought-after speaker at company leadership and sales conferences, sharing the platform with everyone from today's business leaders, broadcast personalities, and even a former U.S. president. He is the author of a number of books on sales and marketing influence with a total book sales of, get this, over 1 million copies. His book, The Go-Giver, co-authored by John David Mann, has sold over 500,000 copies, which I think is just awesome, and has been translated into 21 languages. It is now being re-released in a new expanded version with the foreword from Huffington Post founder and publisher Arianna Huffington. And this is a real big thing. I really just love this part about this gentleman. He is an advocate and supporter and a defender of free enterprise and believes that the amount of money that someone makes is in direct proportion to how many people they serve. And I think that's just awesome. And he is also, and I think this is great too, he is also an unapologetic animal fanatic, serves on the board of trustees of Furry Friends Adoption and Clinic in his town of Jupiter, Florida. Ladies and gentlemen, the one, the only, the great, the awesome Bob Burg. Bob, thank you so much for taking your time out for me today, and I appreciate you having me on the show.
Well, that was very kind of you, Rick. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Yeah, we've had a little technical turmoil getting together, but I think that between the two of us, I think we can conquer the world now.
Absolutely.
A couple of things. I just want to talk a lot about the Go-Giver, but what I really want to do is kind of lead up to that. And I'd read somewhere and heard you talk about that you got into broadcasting. That was kind of your first thing. Can you tell me a little bit about why you got into broadcasting and how you kind of got there?
Well, I was always that kid who went to the ball game, to the Red Sox games, because I grew up in the greater Boston area. And, I'd bring a tape recorder with me and I'd actually do the play-by-play of the game, annoying the heck out of everyone around me. And, eventually I'd go like, okay, Stremski's at the bat, But so I I always had a thing for that. I always wanted to do that. Or I'd have a record player. I'm 57, so probably many of your listeners don't even know what a record player is. But I have a record player. I'd cut out the news, sports, and weather out of the newspaper, and I'd read it, and I'd DJ and play. I was doing all those things.
Kidding.
So I knew I wanted to be in broadcasting, and I thought at first it would be sports, but I ended up getting a job in news, and it was the only way I could break in. So I took that job. I was actually the late night news guy for a small ABC affiliate in the Midwest.
Very cool.
But it was. But I really wasn't a good broadcaster, though. I wasn't a journalist. I could read the news and so forth, but I was sort of. I didn't know the news. I was 24 years old and didn't really care. And I remember there was a line in the great movie Ghostbusters, where Sigourney Weaver's character said to Bill Murray something like, "You look more like a game show host," and that would have been me. I wish I had to do again. I probably would have somehow found a way to be a game show host or something. I probably could have pulled that off, but wasn't a journalist. So I found myself soon graduated into sales, and the challenge with that though was I knew nothing about sales.
Okay.
And I had no training, and the company I started with was, at best negligible in terms of their training. So I had to kind of figure it out myself. And I'm not the type that figures things out for myself really well. I need systems to be able to, and I didn't even realize that at the time until I walked into a bookstore, again, 35 years ago, back when bookstores, the major feature of a bookstore was books. As opposed to coffee and pastries and all that stuff. So I got this book. It was called How to Master the Art of Selling by Tom Hopkins, which is now a classic.
Absolutely.
And I remember just looking at the title, it gave me encouragement. Master the Art of Selling. There's an art to this. I mean, there's a way to do it. And so I got his book and I started studying it, and every night I would study it. I'd rehearse and I would drill and I would practice and I would just go through. And within about 3 weeks, my sales began to go through the roof. And I became a real student of sales. I started studying Ziegler and Tracy and all the people who were so fantastic. But the thing is about this, and what I think there's a lesson here, is that the difference between where I was when I first picked up that book and where I was 3 weeks later was simply the result of having a system for doing it. It wasn't me figuring it out. I didn't have the ability to figure out how to sell. I needed to learn from people who had already done it. This is where having a system is so important. And I personally define a system as the process of predictably achieving a goal based on a logical and specific set of how-to principles.
Very good.
Yeah. Now the key is predictability. If it's been discovered that by doing A you'll get the desired result of B, then you know that all you need to do is A and keep doing A, and you'll eventually get the desired result of B.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And
Absolutely.
of course you teach that. You teach a system and you teach people how to, and that's really what it's all about. So we can all learn from others, and we can all, rather than trying to reinvent a wheel or invent that wheel, we just kind of look to see who has already done it, who's put the information out there to help us do it, and we do it.
Absolutely. I mean, I had a friend who he never used to study. He always used to wing it, and his sales numbers always reflected that. And
Absolutely.
there's a fear in sales because you don't have a system. You just don't know from one minute to the next what you're supposed to do. And I think that's a great point. And um, one of the things I've always liked to ask people is this: after you read that book and you started making sales, what did you learn about yourself after you started having some of that success? What did you learn about yourself that you went, man, I can do this? What was the big thing you learned about yourself?
Well, I think there was a sense of confidence that came in, understanding that, if I was willing to listen, if I was willing to take the advice of people who were there before me, I simply had to make the effort to apply it, and I could do it. So it wasn't like, oh, I can't sell. No, it's I can sell, assuming I have the information that will help me, to do it.
Very, very good. Now, here's the thing. And so, what were you selling? What was the first thing you sold?
Well, the first thing I was selling was radio and television advertising
Okay,
time.
okay.
And then I was selling solar energy hot water heaters to homeowners.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, and that was a very high ticket sale, and it really taught me a whole lot. And that's really where I believe I kind of came into my own as a salesperson. I learned more from doing that than probably anything else, and it was really a fantastic opportunity to do so.
Yeah, that had to have been an interesting sale, that's for sure. A lot of kneecap to kneecap selling, and I think that's what makes salespeople strong. Is I think what has happened, what I have noticed a lot, is that people entering into the quote sales arena, I think look at all this technology as easier ways to sell, and really it boils down to you have to sit across from somebody and show them how your product can benefit them. And I don't think that ever is going to go away. I think social media and some of these things help, but it really comes down to they need to look you in the eye, and
Mhm.
you need to be able to see somebody and get a feel for it. I think that's awesome. And I think that's something very important that a lot of people don't really realize, and that's why I think your books are so incredibly important. And I will
Thank
talk about your book here, the one that helped me here, in just a second. But the next question I have here is, how did your sales career lead into speaking? I'm always fascinated how that transition takes place.
you. Well, I attended a Zig Ziglar seminar,
Okay.
and there was another gentleman speaking. His name was Billy Burden, Burden. He's since passed away. He was a great guy. And Billy was doing a thing on memory training.
Okay.
And I had always had a very untrained, I would say a lousy memory, but really it was just an untrained memory. But along with getting Zig's materials that day at the back of the room, I also got Billy's. And so, because I had such a poor, untrained, memory, so what I did is unlike what a lot of people do, I actually went through the program and studied it, and learned
Yeah,
it,
exactly.
and started applying it. And all of a sudden, it was like really making such a huge difference with me. I mean, I could go into rooms full of people, remember their names, I could make, all this great stuff. So in the back of Billy's program was a thing that said, if you'd like to earn some part-time money, selling these materials and speaking, call our office. So I did, and I went down there, and they showed me how to do free programs where I'd speak at, civic clubs, organizations. I do 25-minute talks. They taught me how to, close from the platform. And I think I was probably at that time, or from what I understood, was their leading salesperson in the
Really
country after a
awesome.
while. Well, I just followed a system. Again, I just learned how to do it. And so I was a good student. But eventually I wanted to kind of break off on my own and do my own thing. And I actually sort of morphed into a speaking business and joined National Speakers Association so I could learn how to actually build a speaking business where I would be paid for speaking and I would, build a career in that. So I kind of had it at that time. I knew I was hooked on it, and it was something I really wanted to do and had a lot of joy in doing so. And so, again, I just followed the system on how to build a speaking business. And within a few years, I was kind of off and running.
Now, these are things I know. This isn't big picture stuff, but a lot of the people I work with are just getting started. So, do you remember that first time you walked up, the very first time you walked up on stage, and how you felt? And then, what was your internal conversation when you left and got in your car and started heading home? What were you saying to yourself?
Well, in terms of my first paid professional speech, remember I had probably done 250 free ones before that, where I was selling, Billy stuff and his memory tapes, by the way, at that time.
Oh,
It was
yes,
tapes, not even
absolutely.
and so, and so I'd already had experience doing it, but it was still a great feeling to know that I was actually, receiving a check. It was, it was a long time. It was a small check. It wasn't a
Right.
big check when I first started, but it was still a good feeling. But it's interesting though. I still get just as nervous before speaking now. When I'm speaking in front of 15,000 people or 50 people, I get just as nervous today as I did back then.
Really?
Beforehand. Now, once I walk on stage, I kind of feel very confident. I'm prepared, and I, feel good about it. But beforehand, well, those butterflies are there just like, just like they always were.
And that's something too that people will tell me is like, well, because I've been in front of lots of people before, done a lot of speaking, and they ask me that question, do you get nervous? Well, and I've been in some bands and played in front of audiences and stuff, and you get nervous, but all that training and the system training that you have just sort of clicks when you get on that stage. It
Hmm.
clicks,
Hmm.
and then you're rolling. You're just rolling, and it's just.
Exactly.
I remember the first time I got paid for a speaking gig, I was flying home and went, and somebody actually paid
I know.
me to do this. This is awesome. And it is. It's very addicting.
Yeah, yeah. I remember back when Steve Martin was doing comedy,
Oh, he was my
before he was,
favorite.
and he used to do it. He was, and I saw him in concert. Actually, I first heard this riff that he did on an album, but he did it in the concert too, where he was just having a great time up there, doing his thing. Of course, he was very much a professional. He
Oh, yeah.
wasn't just, But I remember one of the things he said was something like, "I can't believe that I get paid for doing
I
this."
absolutely.
I remember I thought that,
I think that
you
was
know.
on Comedy Isn't Pretty or one of
Yeah.
those. Yeah, that's awesome. He's one of my favorites. Well, it is, and because you're getting a chance to help people, you got your experience that you're putting out to them, and then the appreciation is they pay for it, and when people see that, then they tend to follow you, and I think it's an amazing business, and I try to encourage everybody. I don't care if you're scared, get up there and do it, because there's something that you have a value that people want to hear
Mhm.
about. I think
Mhm.
everybody can contribute. So now we got you up on stage. Your first book. Let me see if I have that copy right here. The Endless
Yeah,
Referrals. Now this is
right.
this is a different edition. It's not
That's the
the.
third.
It's a third edition. It's not the first edition I purchased with the
No.
you on the phone, the blue
And
cover,
dark
everything.
dark hair.
Dark hair, man. It was jet
Right.
black. Like that guy
Yeah,
looks
jet
like
black. That's
and
right.
and this book and now this was your first book, correct? I mean, your
Yeah.
first published one. And here's where I want to kind of interject my personal story and how Bob has helped me. Years and years ago, I was involved in a financial service business, and I had hundreds of recruits, and I had offices in many different states. And I came to Kansas City one day, and there was a gentleman talking, and he held up Bob's book, Endless Referrals.
Wow.
I can't remember what the guy's name was, but he said, "This book will change your life." And as with you, Bob, I'm like, well, I'm not smart enough to know anything. I'm going to go buy that book. And so I grew up in a small town in Iowa called Mason City, and they didn't have any bookstores there. So I drove 2 hours to Minneapolis, Minnesota to go to a B.
Wow.
Dalton's or something like that. And I found that book. And at the time, they had a business section that was probably only this big, and it was right there, and I bought it. I carried that book into every single meeting I ever went into. It was all tattered and torn, and I told every single person, if you don't buy this book, you will not have any
Uh,
success in this business. And I
wow.
have used that philosophy ever since I read that. I've never done one cold call. I've never done anything like that. And I went from financial service into the tech industry where I had no tech experience. I was a financial service guy and I was a mechanic. I could build a race car like nobody's business. But I never got into technology until when I got in, I used the principles in this book. And I never had to worry about it. It is the most incredible how-to nuts and bolts book. And it is the most if I bet you 250,000 a year sales is because of me, Bob. I'm just kidding. But
Well,
it
I got
was
to tell you, to say that you just made my day is an understatement. You know, there's no greater feeling for an author to know that his book made a difference in someone's life. I mean, that's the ultimate payoff for me. So thank you. I can't tell you how much that means to me.
and the reason I encourage people because it's an easy read. And it's not complicated. It's not written complicated. You know, I've read some sales books where there's a lot of it's very complicated to kind of get through. It is such an easy read and it's so easy to follow. And then that leads into so when you got into speaking, and then what inspired you to write this book? I mean, what event happened, or what happened? You go, you know what? I need to put this in writing.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, a number of people in National Speakers Association, who some of the greatest people in the world, told me that, you know, you really need to have a book because what it's going to do is it's going to give you much better credibility. It's going to help you position yourself within your niche market. You're going to get higher fees. You're going to, you know, and all the different things. And so again, I was listening. And so that first book was I didn't really want to write it. It was just, and I really don't like writing. You know, people, I've got 10 books out. People have said, well, you must love writing. No, I don't like writing books. I like having written books.
There you go.
Okay, past tense, right? And so, but so I did what I needed to do. And this one of the people, Randy Pennington, I don't know if you know Randy, great speaker on leadership and just fantastic. He actually introduced me to his agent. So rather than at that time me having to go through that whole first-time author trying to find an agent, he actually gave me an introduction right to his, and he
Very nice.
liked the manuscript and took it to the publisher and got it done. And you know, it was really a neat thing. And so that now I'll say this particular book, I didn't get people calling me. Okay, the one time I did, I remember because I remember the client one time getting a call that, you know, we read your book, we'd like to have you come and speak, but that was not the norm for this book.
Really? Okay.
No, but I got very few calls for it. But what I did is I used it as an outgoing positioning tool because, and back then I was personally calling the prospects, the people who were planning meetings and were hiring speakers and so forth. And what I would do is within the conversation, I would, you know, ask if they had, you know, read the book or if they'd heard of the book and would they like a copy and so forth. And I could use that, you know, the fact that I was a published author, and I could use that. And when they got the book, if they didn't like it, well, they weren't going to like me anyway, so it wouldn't matter. If they did like the book, well, they were going to like me, so they'd want to have me come in. So I use it as an outgoing. Now, the Go-Giver's been a different thing, and that's probably because it's a story, it's a parable, it has that emotional connection, it makes its way through sales organizations and then we get calls to speak. But that wasn't until, you know, 7-8 years ago. But until that time, but with that first book, it was totally an outgoing, so an outbound marketing tool, or I should say positioning tool. So when people say, well, is a book going to help me get business? Yeah, but indirectly, you're going to still, unless it just takes off and, you know, booms or something. No, you're going to use it as an outgoing positioning tool, which is fine, which you can do with a booklet, which you can do with a special report, which you can do with anything.
Very good. Very good. So so once the book was published and you got it out there, how did you see your career change? Did it change, or how did it change, or what changed after the book was out and people started getting it in their hands? It started showing up in bookstores. How did it change your career?
Well, it was also about that time where I had been really, really working my speaking business hard. Okay, and it took me a few years to build it. It's not an easy. It's certainly, the speaking business is a business like anything else. It takes time and persistence and so forth. But at that time, I think I was just starting to kind of hit a place where I was ready for that kind of big takeoff and utilizing the book as a positioning tool. At the same time, I was starting to get some really good clients and repeat business, and obviously working a referral business, because once I got into a niche, I could then work it horizontally and I could work it vertically and the whole thing. And so at that time, it just all happened. So I think it built my confidence. And it you know, certainly said to me, okay, you know, you've got the tools to work with. Just keep staying hungry and you'll be all right.
Okay, so this now your career's kind of moving in this direction, and same question as the last one. When when your speaking business was really rolling, blowing and going, at what point did you come up with the Go Giver, and what inspired that, and what inspired you to write it as more of a parable than a how to than a nuts and bolts, and how did that transition work? Because it's quite a bit different than writing a
Uh-huh.
nuts and bolts book.
Okay, so I absolutely. And let me ask you this. Do you want me to first share something that happened between that time that was a
Absolutely.
big mistake?
Okay, yes, let's hear that. Let's hear that.
Well, starting in the later 90s, um, this thing came along called the internet that was really starting to
I've heard
change
of it.
things for people. Well, me being my usual futuristic early adopter self, I said, this internet thing's never going to take off.
You and Bill Gates both.
So I really went kicking and screaming into utilizing this technology. Now, I agree totally with what you said earlier. Technology, what we have, and I love it now, as far as the social media and all the different things. It's a tool. It's not the end all be all. It's the tool that's going to help you get to where you can be in a position to communicate value to your prospective customers and clients. It's not the end all be all, but it's still important. And it was important back then to start utilizing it. And they say, well, change is something most people don't like. And in the personal development field, there's sort of what I call a personal development political correctness,
Okay.
where you're supposed to say things like, "Oh, I love change." No, I don't love change. I hate change. Okay. Now, you've still got to change, and I didn't. And I really kind of let myself go. And I said, no, I don't need to adjust with that. I've got things going on and I've got this and that. And I really don't think this thing's going to be as big as people are saying it is. And I got to tell you, it set my career back a few years.
Really?
And it
Okay.
really was uncomfortable for a while. And I just had to almost start from scratch again. Um, so there's a real lesson in there
Wow.
that,
Okay.
that it's not whether you like change or not. That's not even the question. It's not the issue. It's, are you willing to understand that things do change, and that if you want to keep up and stay ahead of the pack and keep up with the pack, are you willing to make those changes? And it was a big
Absolutely.
lesson I learned. It was a big lesson I learned, because even back when social media now began, right around 2006, 2007, 2000, it was just starting. I really resisted that at first.
Okay.
And then I said, nope, I'm not going to do that again. I've got to learn how to do it. I've got, I don't know if it's going to actually stay with us. I don't know, because again, I'm not great at predicting the future, as you saw, but I knew that I needed to put myself in the position that I was ready for it if it happened.
Amazing.
And
Okay.
social media has been a huge benefit in my business, and it's just turned the, it's just been amazing for me. So, but I really messed up when I refused to make that change. We just can't do it. Um, as Joe Schumpeter, I think, talked about creative destruction, right? And that's how society grows, through creative destruction.
That's right.
And so we've got to put our own feelings about change aside. And if we're like me and don't like change, you got to do it anyway. So around 2003, 2004, I had this idea for taking the basic premise of endless referrals, which was, the all things being equal, people will do business with and refer business to those people they know, like, and trust. How do you develop that kind of relationship? You focus on the other person. You focus on providing value to that person. You make it about that person, not about yourself. And I thought, wouldn't it be great if we could take that how-to book and turn it into a parable? Because I'd always loved reading business
Yep.
parables. Starting with Ogmandino's Greatest Salesman in
Oh
the
yeah,
World, James
absolutely.
Classen's The Richest Man of Babylon. Then you had all the 1 minute books by
Yep.
Doctors Spencer Johnson and Ken Blanchard, and Robin Sharma's books, and all the Whale Done, and all these great books. Most of us have read most of
Oh
them,
yes.
probably. They're wonderful. And I thought I'd like to do that. So I had the idea as a title, The Go Giver. Now, obviously, in the title, because I have a knack with titles sometimes, that titles that will catch. I positioned it opposite go-getter, which is something that we're familiar, but yet being a go-giver is not the opposite of being a go-getter. We love people to be go-getters because go-getters
Absolutely.
take action,
That's
right?
right.
You got
That's
to,
right.
nothing happens if you don't take action. We love go-getters. We want people to be both go-getters, people of action, and go-givers, people who focus on bringing value to others. What we don't want people to be is go-takers.
That's
Those
right.
people, right? So that's the opposite of go-giver. But the title itself, I kind of thought we had a winner. And I sketched out some basic characters and a very, very basic storyline. But as I started to write it, and I began to write it, I think in about 2005, maybe 2000, early 2006, I'm a how-to author. And there's a big difference between writing a how-to book and writing a work of fiction. And I just knew that I wasn't going to be able to do justice to this story, which I had a feeling could be something really big.
Okay.
So I asked John David Mann, who I had never met in person at that time, but he was the editor-in-chief of a magazine I used to write for. And not only is he a brilliant editor, but I also knew, and people within that a specific niche knew that John was a brilliant writer. He was the ghostwriter behind some very big and well-written books. And so he was the only one I wanted to be the main storyteller. And I just asked him. And when I say I asked, I mean I pleaded with him to be the lead writer and storyteller on this. And so we collaborated on this. And he was so great to work with. It was really a pleasure. He's a brilliant guy, but he's so humble and easy to work with. So
Really?
oh my gosh, yeah. And now he's in such demand. This guy has and so that really was it. And so, but yeah, I thought the parable would be a good idea because again, parables are easy to read, they're
They are.
fun. And there's an old saying that we've always heard: facts tell, stories sell.
That's right.
Which is probably true. I think what stories really do, though, in order to sell, is they first connect.
Yes.
I think you can connect
Exactly.
with a story, and it's only when you have an interpersonal connection, which is really what sales is. It's an interpersonal connection. I define selling as discovering what somebody wants, needs, or desires, and helping them to get it. That's what selling is. But it happens, and you're able to do that because of the personal connection you're able to make with someone.
Absolutely.
And so I think the story is what really did it. And right away, I mean, it just kind of took off because our early adopters were the people who were already very successful, people who were already following the principles in the book long before we ever wrote them, because there's nothing new in the book. I mean, he's right, and so. And then I think at that point they started then sharing it with other people, and then the second wave of buyers, and this is just from what we heard, with the emails we receive, are those people who heard about the book from someone they respected, and they were having trouble in their business. They shifted their focus, like Joe in the story, and now all of a sudden, and we hear all these
Oh yeah.
great things, and what a fantastic thing to hear from people. So that really is the whole story with that.
Well, and this book here, The Go Giver, is, I think by reading this and then reading this, it kind of ties everything together. That's what I found when I read this. It's like, and just like you said, a parable. Everything I have dozens of stories that I always talk about because it's something that happened in my life, but I learned things from, but I didn't really learn them at the time it happened, only later in life. And when you read something like this, and this is an amazing, amazing book, it's so well written, it's easy to follow, but you can see yourself in some of these positions, or somebody that's been like that. You're like, well, duh, I know Umpty Squad over here, he was like that. So it's easy for people to relate. And I think with the combination of those and then your other books, it's easy for people to look at it and go, you know what, maybe I can do it. Because what I have found is, there's some dynamic people out there that you can sit up on stage or you read their books and go, man, that was awesome. But there's no way in the world I could do that. And I think what makes a successful entrepreneur in any case is that if they're helping people try to move from point A to point B, if they think that, you know what, I think I can do that. And I think that's the greatest gift that any entrepreneur can give to somebody is like, look, I'm just an average guy. I put my socks on wrong every day. We make mistakes like think the internet's not going to work. We make things like that. But when they can read this and go, you know what, I think I can pull that off. That to me, I think is the greatest gift that we can give people. And these books do such a
Mhm.
amazing job of giving people insight and go, you know what, I think I can do that. And I think that's what's so important. That's the message that I think these books really give to people. Now, um, I'm going to ask you real quick. I just got a couple other things, man. I could talk to you all day long because this is
Oh,
awesome.
likewise. Thank you.
Um, okay, so after this book came out, your career's starting to change a little bit, and then we talked a little bit about social media. How has that shifted the way you do business, or how has that changed versus when you were just picking up the call, dialing for dollars? How has it morphed your business into what it is today?
Well, I think with social media, it allows us to make initial connections with people that we either never would have been able to connect with without a whole lot of effort and investment and so forth. And also, it allows us to build that relationship deeper, quicker. And it's sort of counterintuitive when you think of it, because how in 140 characters on Twitter, can you, and yet you really can. And if you look at
This is a good example right here. This is how I met you, is on Twitter.
right, and so well, and so what happens is when you're always focused, because remember when we go back to the all things being equal, it's not the people do business with and refer business to those computers they know, like, and trust. No, it's the person behind or in front of them.
Correct.
And so when you're on Facebook, when you're on LinkedIn, when you're on Twitter, when you're on whatever medium you happen to be on, when your question is always, how can I add value to this person's life or to this person's business or to this person's,
Absolutely.
now you're approaching it the correct way. And you can always you can always connect, you can always drive a relationship deep when that's your premise, when that's where you're coming from.
Absolutely. And what social media do you find, because there's so many of them out there and you get bombarded with all these, what social media do you use most consistently that you find you can help more people more effectively?
Probably with me, it's Twitter.
Okay.
Okay. I also have a pretty big presence on Facebook. And while I'm on LinkedIn, I don't do as much on LinkedIn.
Okay.
And I probably should do more on it. I realize that. Um, when we say that, and I said earlier how, well, you got to be willing to make the change and you got to do this and that. At the same time, at 57 years old, I'm not always as willing to do some things that I really don't.
I totally get that. I totally get that.
It's, yeah.
Well, and a lot of these social medias, they come and they go, and you have a lot of younger folks who just, they push, 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 push. You got to be involved in everything. And as solopreneurs, we just don't have the bandwidth to
Right.
handle
No,
all those.
it's dangerous to do that.
It is, because you end up spreading yourself so thin that
Exactly.
I find Twitter to be very useful, LinkedIn and Facebook. I'm big on videos because they're just easier for me to do. So I have a couple of large YouTube channels,
Hmm.
and other people get results at different things. But I think what your message is and how you get it out to people, and regardless of what medium that you're using, helping other people will eventually do that. That's how we met. We met through Twitter. Had I known when I first bought your book that we'd be sitting here 25 years later talking on the interweb,
Yeah,
or
right,
the interweb,
the interweb, yeah.
the interweb, and I mean, I have a whole group of people that I used to work with in the former industry that I used to refer this books, that when this is done, they are just going to not believe it. And that's what the power of social media is. I mean, I think if people use it, just like you said, if they use it correctly, it's amazing the things that they can pull off. And look at how your career has changed, starting with just the old telephone and then
Right.
moving into social media.
Exactly.
But it's a blend. And maybe you agree or disagree, but I think you still have to blend everything together.
I've never thought it's an either or. I believe it's an and.
There.
Yeah, absolutely.
How much? And I only got two more questions for you. How much time a day do you usually spend working social media?
That's a great question. I would bet I'm on a couple of hours a day.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah, which I know is more than a lot of people. But when I'm not when I'm not on the road speaking, and by the way, I'm very much not on when I'm on the road, because I don't enjoy doing it from the
Oh, okay.
iPhone.
Okay.
So and because also anyone who's connected with me on social media knows I'm very responsive. So if I post something and people comment on them, I get right back, and I do it. And from the road, I just don't do that well with the iPhone and
Gotcha.
all
That
that.
was
So
my
I
other
have
question I was going to ask you is what's your best way of doing it? Do you do the
right.
computer or the
I'm right
handheld?
out on the computer, yeah.
Very
And
nice. That,
so I'll set it up in the hotel rooms. But a lot of times, if I'm just doing a quick program where I get in the night before, do program in the morning, go on to the next city, or come home, what have you, I don't have enough time to even get on. So when I'm at home, though, which I am now, I'm right in front of my big old computer, and it's very comfortable for me, and I'm very responsive, and so because of that, I do set time aside because that is a way that really has helped build my business in a way that I enjoy.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
well, we're sitting here and you're able. And I tell people this that back in the days when you used to pick up the phone book and cold call, now you can sit in the comfort of your home with all your books back there,
Hmm.
and you have access to billions
Yeah.
of people to get your message out. That just I think sometimes that's hard for people to get their head around, and I don't necessarily know if they understand the real gravity of it. And
Yeah.
if used properly, I mean, look at the things you've been able to do and the followers that you have and the people that you touched. That it's I don't know, it's amazing. And I think eventually the younger generation will learn that hey, this is a lot more important than just tweeting out certain things. You have a huge impact on how people's businesses will run. I mean, look at the impact that you had on me, and I'm sure thousands of other people just through the writings of a book. Now, with this type of medium that you can use,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, I can't.
Well, and you look at the impact that you've had on others and you're having on others, and the impact that the people who taught me, who, never knew me, many of them I got to know actually later, which is sort of like what we
That's
were talking
awesome.
about, when I got to share the platform with Tom Hopkins, and when we had Zig Ziglar speak at one of our yearly events we used to put on, and some of the different people who, I got to meet people
That's
who I'd
awesome.
read and studied. So it's sort of a generational thing, right? It
Oh,
keeps going.
absolutely.
And the people you're helping who are thinking the same thing, and they will get a chance to meet you probably because social media has made it so that it really does just flatten the world a little bit.
Oh, absolutely. Now, the last question I have for you, other than what's the meaning of life? But I think Monty Python took care of that one. Um, if someone is new getting into the business, let's say they want to become a speaker or an information marketer or something like that, what advice would you give somebody new coming into the business world that you've learned that you would suggest to somebody here, just a good piece of advice that somebody could take away and say, and then let's say they don't have thousands of dollars to spend, what would be one of the things that you would recommend a new entrepreneur coming into the entrepreneurial world look for?
The first thing I would say is find out who has already done what you want to do and start studying that person.
Gotcha.
Study their writings, look at what they've done, and assuming that their values seem to be congruent with your values, follow them. Otherwise, of course, if they're not, and that they may have accomplished something, but not in the way that you would, feel right. But assuming all else is equal, that absolutely find out who's done what you want to do, find out what they've done, and do it.
Very good. Well, Bob, thank you so much for your time today. This has been such an honor. I've learned so much, and I'll take the other 500 questions that I had for you, and we'll just save those for another time. But Bob Burg, thank you so much. Guys, you can check him out on Twitter at Bob Burg, or you can go to, is it just Burg.com or
Yeah,
bobburg.com and check out all this stuff.
burg.com. Yep.
Very good, guys. Thank you so much, Bob. I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Been a pleasure.
Thank you.